Rogue radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, welcome. You can see I'm ready. Welcome, Fade to Black. Today is Tuesday, February 27th, 2024. Very excited about tonight's show. Richard Dolan is with us. And we're going to be talking a lot. Well, okay. Well, there's no telling where the conversation is going to go with Richard. It's just what normally happens. But I framed this show around a very exciting conversation that I had with Richard last week about his new book, USOs, something that he's very passionate about. I don't even know if that's the title of the book. I'm just calling it USOs. USOs and the National Security State Part 3. But I want his ideas behind all of this too, as well. Of course, a lot of that will be in the book and some cases and things, and we'll touch upon that. But it is real, and there are so many incidents. And when you think about how much water is Earth, what a perfect place to go and hide. Yeah. And do your work and investigate. We haven't even checked it all out. So tonight, amongst other things, we'll talk about USOs with Richard. He is in the batter's box. He got that joke. Tomorrow night, Dane Wigington is back with us. We'll be talking about global climate intervention. And with all of that, let's just get straight to it. We know Richard. He is one of the best-known UFO researchers in the world, in our community. Very well respected, and the author of several groundbreaking books that I read over and over again. By the way, I paid for them all. That's right. I have. They're that good. If you haven't, head over to Richard Dolan members. He is hanging out with not only his community, broadcasting live, and he has just got this thing going on, and you need to go check it out over at Richard Dolan members. And without that, he has done countless television shows and films. We have done TV shows together. We have done films together. We've done a lot of radio together, a lot of conferences together. I respect him so much, and it's always great when he's on the show. I always enjoy myself. So let's see what happens tonight. I'm just going to leave it at that and say, what's up, man?
Hey. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you for that very, very adorable and nice introduction.
I've got to change. I remember you and I talking about that one. Man, we got to change it up a little. We got to change. It's just, and I remember like maybe the first 20 interviews, and I'm just reading and going through. I'm like, no, it's just everybody knows all this stuff.
Yeah, it's better now. It's better the way you do it now.
Yeah. Everybody
By the way,
knows.
after listening to your intro, which I hadn't really listened in a little while, I feel about 11% funkier.
Okay. All right. So
it makes me, it's just really, you got good stuff going there.
So with that, welcome back to the show. Lots to talk about tonight. But what was the last piece of me? I got email. I got email. Don't forget, man. Don't forget to ask Richard. So that's what's really cool. We have the bleeping part, and we've discussed that so many times on its origins and its origin story. But what was the last piece of music that you listened to today?
Here we go. Every time you ask me, like it's fun, but the last few times that I have answered you, I'm thinking, here we go again. This is like more 1970s nostalgia.
Oh, I
This is
love
all
it.
people ever think about me now. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this is the guy who likes the 70s music. You know, the music, the decade. I would tell my kids, yeah, that's back in the day. That's what we call the good decade, the 70s.
You know, our parents, when they would do that, whatever happened to the Dave Clark Five? That was
Yeah,
a good
I've become
band.
this guy. I've
Yeah,
become this
you have.
So I did I don't know if it was the last one I heard. The last one I remember. That's even worse. Because like I'm showing so the last song I remember was I think earlier today, and it definitely was by the Steve Miller Band. And it was Jet Airliner by the Steve Miller Band, which is I love the Steve. I have to just say, love Steve Miller forever. And I heard Big Old Jet Airliner earlier today. I don't know if that was the last song I heard. It was the last song I remembered.
Okay, can't go wrong with that. He had a great band. He had Boz Scaggs on bass, and you think about that.
Yeah, Boz Scaggs is really great.
Yeah.
People under 30 are like, what the hell are they talking about?
They have
What are
no
these people
clue.
even talking about?
You know the last track I listened to today, and I did this was Run DMC. It's like that, and it's oh man, it's such an amazing song. But there was a reason for that, and it is this. Earlier today, they found they convicted the two killers of Jam Master Jay of Run DMC, who was killed back in 2002 in his studio in Jamaica, Queens, and nobody knew anything. There was never an arrest. That was 2002.
It took over 20 years. That's incredible.
Yeah. And
even more incredible that they actually were able to close it. That's actually quite remarkable.
That is. And there's a new documentary out. I talk about it because it's so good. It's on Netflix. It's called Kings from Queens. It's a 3-part documentary about Run DMC. Came out a few weeks ago. Incredible. When documentaries like that, because we're so familiar with pop culture and the artists that we love, you see, you're rehashing and redoing stuff that we are not the case with this. It's really good. But what they did in the documentary, which is why I went back and listened to It's Like That, is they did a big section on him about his personality, and they talked a little bit about the murder too, as well, of course, but that he was the nicest guy, he was the coolest guy, he was this, and what he brought to the band as far as a personality and guidance for the band. And why would somebody he was the last person that you would think somebody was angry with. And which was pointed out in the documentary. But okay, all right.
I don't know much of that story, but it does sound very interesting and tragic.
Yeah. And also, It's Like That is in one of the video games that I play, and I cannot wait. I have to play the game long enough for it to cycle through. Right? I'm so excited when it does. But Run DMC, and I have a large collection of clamshell Adidas that I think about every single time I see one of their videos. Okay, which I know you do too. You like your clamshell Adidas.
Oh, I'm all about my bling and getting the latest, things that the young people like to get. I'm just trying to fit in here.
Now, we're going to talk about. Okay, so. Like I said, I wanted to frame this around USOs tonight, but we're going to get to that. I want to ask you this: do you prefer expressing your opinions on the subject of UFOs and what you've learned, or the facts behind UFOs and what you have learned?
It's an interesting way to look at it. Well, you say expressing, so in a public forum like this, for example, I think it's usually more useful for me to express what I think the facts are. However, over the last few years, I would say more and more, I think it can be useful if I can express, I don't know if I would call it my opinions, maybe an analysis or assessment of what I think is going on relating to UFOs or UAP now. So it's a little bit of both. I think of it as like, the facts are the skeleton and the rest is the rest of the body. So you have to know your facts before you really start speculating. So it has always been most important for me to know my facts, to know as accurately as I can, like what actually has happened, what is the nature of this phenomenon without having too many preconceived ideas. But the thing is, inevitably, when you're in any subject, doesn't matter which. For me, it's been 30 years now. You're going to form opinions. You're going to form assessments, and there's just no way around that. So for me, I just try. I try to be careful about it. I don't always succeed, but I do try. Even now, I find my opinions they're not the same. They all, I'll change my opinions about various things here and there. So I hope I don't fall into a trap of just throwing my opinions out there all the time. And if I do, I hope people will call me out on it, because I don't think that's the best direction for me. I try to be as factual as I can. And then after that, form as carefully as I can, ideally, form my assessments. That's the goal.
Is it difficult because you evolve into a position of yourself personally, right, of a knowledge base, right? You're absorbing all of this, and then you have to do something with that information. That's the way the brain works. And then now, because you are sitting on all of this research, that your brain wants to verbalize what you have learned and what those assessments are, right?
Yeah, that's right. And also, yes, that's absolutely true. About 4 years ago, I wrote The Alien Agendas, which is an openly speculative book. And I remembered when I sat down to do that, it was because I decided, I said to myself, look, you've been trying to be as careful as you can about not running your mouth on your opinions too much. I say too much. I've always done it a bit. But I thought this is you have an opportunity just to sit down and speculate on what you think things look like. What does it look like? And I thought that's a fair thing to do. So I did it for that. And the other thing about UAP now is that it's a scientific, it's a philosophical, it's an existential issue, but it is also a matter of public policy. And as such, it lends itself to policy opinions, I guess we could say. And so, yes, I've formed those as well. I've been a proponent of, I guess we can call disclosure. As complicated though as that is likely to be, I guess you could say I've formed opinions about the subject. But even so, look, I mean, on my website, I've got folks who have definite political opinions. Some are liberal, some are conservative, because politics works its way into my website. I've got a very active membership base there, and I've recognized that even on matters of conventional politics, let alone UFOs, people are going to have different opinions, and it's not for me to actively like oppose someone just because their opinions are different from mine, because we're always coming to different assessments about certain things, and the idea is to listen to other people, not to condemn them. So I try to do that on my website, whether it deals with politics or UFO policy as well. I always try to be respectful of those that even I disagree with as best I can. And that's just because I know, look, we're not only fallible, but we form opinions on the basis of, I just wrote a piece on this for my site a couple of days ago, based on core values that we can identify. And what might those core values be? You really think about it. Like, it can be freedom. It could be truth. It could be order. It could be safety. It could be family. It could be self-actualization. It could be God and spirituality. And it could be progress. That's a big one. And whatever that core value is, I feel is going to have a very big impact on how you evaluate whether it's UFOs, whether it's disclosure, or whether politics with your relatives on Thanksgiving. It's the core values. And it occurred to me that I haven't really analyzed it that much in myself, much less in other people. But I realize, like, when I do that, it actually helps me to understand where I'm coming from and sometimes where the other person's coming from in a respectful way. It helps us to be a little bit empathetic, because when you realize, okay, that person's coming from a perspective of progress. I'm coming from a perspective, in this case, of order. And they don't always go together. Like, you see what I mean? So
I do.
It helps to get a understanding of that. So for me, the way to cut through that is I try to be as factual as I can, and not try to tell people what they're supposed to think. I fail that test most days. I'm usually running my mouth on opinions one way or another. But I really, honestly, I'm really glad you brought this up, because you're reminding me of what one of my values is, which is truth, and it's not.
Well, see, but here's the danger zone, and of course I say this with the most respect possible. People ask themselves, okay, that's cool, but what does Richard think?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know what I mean? That's tough. That's tough. And here's you bring up a really good point. I like those values, and it's almost look. We've had this philosophy versus science thing going on, well, in a very definitive way for the last 300 years. It's been going on for thousands of years, but putting that aside, this is the opportunity for philosophy actually to get up on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Because the questions that are in front of us, the real ones, are deep philosophical issues that need to be discussed. It's not necessarily a scientific one. And those are there. I mean, certainly the science part of it is there. The data part of it is there. But deep rooted, every philosopher that has ever written anything, you could take his most quotable line, right? His most quotable quote, and slap it right on the UFO ET contact disclosure issue, and it fits.
I agree. I agree. It's because it's a subject that, it's been working its magic into me now for 3 decades. And I find that it has really enabled me to ask myself, not only what is this phenomenon, that's important, but what are we? What are we human beings as a species? And I will just say, I've gone on my own journey and trying to understand that, because I want to know. I feel that it's important somehow for myself to get a handle on the human problem as every bit as much as the alien problem or the UFO problem or the UAP problem, because they're here. There is a they, and they are here. And one of the questions that it prompts me to ask is why. What is it? Is it Earth? Is it the resources of Earth? Is there something about human beings that interests them? If it's Earth, then what? If it's us, then what? Is it both? Why now? Is another question. Have they always been here, or who's the they? Is it gray aliens have always been here, or is it something else that's always been here? Why does it seem like there's so many of them now in this in the last 100 years? Is there something that's changed? And so there's all of these questions that I'm prompted to ask, and inevitably lead me back down to a study of humanity. What are we? What is our trajectory? So, yeah, I mean, look, the UFO subject is like a crowbar, and it has pried open a door that a door of questions, maybe a few answers, but a lot of questions and a lot of philosophical speculation for sure. It's been amazing on that basis. I don't know if anything else could have taken me down these roads.
Yeah, right. When you look at our community and you think that we are alone in seeking of this, and part of that is true for sure. But when I hear somebody from outside of our community, some big thinker, say, well, really, there's three fundamental questions. Where do we come from? What happens after we die? And are we alone in the universe?
Yeah.
Those are it sounds like a Stanton Friedman quote or a Richard Dolan quote or an idea from inside of our community, but it's not. And that's why those three questions are, it's like the basis of philosophy, right there. And how do we fit in each one of those? And what is our purpose? So
Sure.
Could one overlap into the other? Absolutely. I think they all are in a fundamental way the same question.
It's what a weird thing. I mean, maybe I got into the UFO field for the right reason, or maybe I fell into it, but it turned out to be the luckiest moment of my life, because when I look back over my life prior to being engaged in this subject, like everything that I've done before then really has led me to this. When I was in university, I had two majors and a minor. I was a maniac student. I was one of those guys, and I majored in history, and I also majored in English literature. So we like to look down our nose at all the other people who didn't use their conjunctions properly. And then I also minored in philosophy. And so that was like Mr. Liberal Arts. I just loved all of those types of soft types of disciplines. And, it's a funny thing. I remember being like 19 years old, and my dad, who's still an active duty New York City cop at the time, was very proud of me. We got along great, but he was a little bit perplexed by my love of studying history, because I was really getting into it. And he just one day said, "Richie, what are you going to do with all that history? What are you going to do with that?" That was his question. Like, what are you going to do with that? And it was a crazy thing. I remember that moment, and I don't know how I came up with this answer, but it really was the perfect answer. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I know what it's doing for me. And I said, it's helping me to become the person that I know I need to be. That was what I said. And it was this mystical answer, but I look back like that was a totally true answer. That was probably like future me channeling, entering younger me there and just giving the answer. So I have been, I think, perfectly, or I don't want to say perfect, I've been well suited to do the study of UFOs these last 30 years, because I've really been lucky. I've been able to bring all of the quirky little things that I've always been interested in and gone deep into. And I've been able to apply them. Like, I don't know how many of my colleagues 40 years ago when we were in university are still able to apply their English lit or their history, their philosophy training. But I actually get to do that, which just blows my mind. But having said all of that, like all that, when you started out this conversation asking me, do I like to offer my opinions or stick to the facts? I feel very strongly, now that you're really getting me to think about it, that it's my obligation to be as objective as I always can. And you never succeed perfectly, obviously. But I hope that I'm always able to be as objective about this subject as I can, and to leave my emotions a little bit over to the side, so that I can.
Yeah, but it's tough to do. And kids are going to be kids, right? And we all, as parents, talk about that age when they look at you and ask you why 150 times a day, right? And now the why answer that you give to them about whatever, what is this? That's carpet. Why? Well,
Well,
and
I have lots of opinions about what I think is going on, why I think they are here. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time formulating my own assessment. I've shared that with you before. I'll share it again tonight. I'm very happy to do that, but always as an assessment. So I just want people to know whenever I'm offering my take on what I think is going on, that's all it is. It's just my take. It's just my opinion, my assessment based on what I think I've learned up till now. I do still have, my memory works great. I've got a very good access to most of the factual history of the UFO subject, and I like to synthesize things as best I can. So yeah, I'm happy to share.
now,
I'm always happy to give you my opinion.
so do you have a favorite part of history? And before you answer, I once was walking down the road. There was a pile of books on the side of the road. No explanation why. And I go over, and it was at night, and I'm like, books on the side of the road? I grabbed them, took them home. They were all college books. But the top one was the history of civilization, right?
Standard, like Western, or just all civilization.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so the first 300 pages, which were like 10,000 BC, okay, to I would get up to right around the Dark Ages and stop and go back and read. I was just fascinated with that part of human history.
Yeah.
And that's my attraction. Where's yours?
Wow. I'm at a point where I like to study what I guess I might call meta history now. So the history of the entire trajectory of the human species. So I'm looking at so first of all, in the last 5 years, I've gone deeper and deeper into prehistory. That's become as much of an obsession for me, almost as UAP UFOs are. I got into that because I was.
Have you read this?
Egypt before the pharaohs. No, I don't know that all either.
Okay, you remember? You remember the movie Stargate, right? In the beginning of Stargate, James Spader is packing his backpack in his apartment, and on his nightstand is this book, Michael Hoffman, Egypt Before the Pharaohs. Okay, prehistory, right? This is Egypt before the pharaohs, before 3000 BC, and it covers a couple of 100,000 years, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah. That right there. That book. This is written for you. So
yeah, well, I guess so I'm really into prehistory. And the evolution of our species. I'm very, very engaged in that. And then looking at the rise and fall of complex society. So, I look at stage one, is, I guess, up to the Bronze Age collapse of around, 1100 BC. So that was the first version of human beings developing trade networks. So from Egypt to Mesopotamia to what is now Greece, out to Ireland to get tin and to trade and to set up these networks so that they could create the Bronze Age, and how that collapsed. So that was the first attempt at a complex human civilization. I know there was China. China was doing its own thing and they were very advanced. But what you saw in the Near East, in the Mediterranean, was actually a much more complicated scenario of these different societies speaking different languages, working on very complex trade and relationships and shipping and all of that. And it was a very complicated thing. And then it just fell like a house.
Yeah, in 1120, right? That's the year BC. Every major capital of all of the countries fell. right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
around that,
wait.
very close together.
Yeah. And do you have a theory as to why? And do you think that nobody really has named those invaders? It has been framed as, in a few cases, the sea people,
Yeah,
which I find very, very interesting.
yeah.
Did the sea people have steel when they had bronze weapons? How were they able to just ransack and burn down just everything that was there?
Yeah,
Um,
it's a
do you have
really
a
good question.
theory behind that?
I don't know. I mean, there are experts who study this, and I don't think they all agree. So it's not. It would be arrogant in the extreme for me to just say, "Oh, yeah, this is what I think happened." But pardon me. I don't know. Yes, the Egyptians records talk about the sea peoples who came in and wrecked everything. Um, I don't know. Were they the people who eventually became the ancient Homeric Greek warriors? I think I've heard that as a theory. I'm not sure. I don't really know who these people were, but they clearly came in and wreaked havoc on that civilization at the time and disrupted trade to an extent that things just fell apart. The reason I'm interested in that, you're really making me want to study that a little bit more, but it was the first really very intricate, complex infrastructure, maybe you could say that we created, in which we became reliant on all of these distant people from all of these different distant places, kind of like what we have today. I mean, that's sort of a first version of the world that we now have. We have an ultra complex version of it. But when that one fell, then it started to rebuild, and you end up getting ancient Greece, the ancient Hebrews, and Roman Empire. And Rome really, rebuilt that whole thing even much greater than before. It was a highly, highly elevated, complex, well-ordered, unified civilization. And then that collapsed. They had a good run. And you get what we now call the Dark Ages. And then that slowly began the next iteration, where you get the Age of Exploration and Columbus and the explorers and Europe conquering the world, and basically leading to this version that we now have, which is vastly more complex than anything that Rome did. So it's like, I'm fascinated by that pattern of human society. In other words, I'm asking myself, how many times has it taken us to get to total world mastery? That's really what this is. We're looking at the story of the human species crawling up from a very, what we would call, primitive state, just really learning how to read and write, for goodness sake. Like, we only started writing about 5,000 years ago, a little bit more than that. It's not long ago. And so once we started doing that, we were like seriously off to the races. And we had one iteration. Okay, that fell. All right, here we go. Try another one. Second, Roman Empire. Oh, better job. That's hung in there for a while. Then that fell. And now here we are with this iteration. Now we're using very, very established science and industry. And now this is the most complex infrastructure that is imaginable. And we are now reaching out beyond this planet, and we are creating, all of the technology and all of the science that we're now creating, which is revolutionizing our world and creating what I keep calling the fourth stage of humanity. And we've done it. It's really all happened very quickly. But when I look at the long history of us, like you asked, what am I most interested in? This is what I'm interested in. It's like this inexorable attempt by the human species to completely dominate the world.
Now, how does this fit into? You're going to love the segue, but it's the same subject. How does this fit into the Drake equation? And because if you look at the Drake equation, one of the components of that is how many civilizations blew themselves up, right? How many got to a certain point of development and then it just ended? And is that part of the evolution, or I would even use the word de-evolution of societies that get to a certain point And it's inevitable that, and it's almost like a wacky form of entropy, isn't it? Right. And that you just exhaust everything and then something happens, whether it could be a cosmic disaster, a nuclear disaster, the Black Plague, so some crazy thing that you take technology to a certain level and then you destroy yourselves and you end yourselves.
Right,
That's the
possible.
other part of this, because we've seen it repeat, haven't we? Time after time on this planet.
I think that's a great question. I think it's a really great question. And I wonder about this. Like, in other words, how normal is it that what we did, what we humans just did? How normal is that? I would say it's not normal, but it's not unique, but it's not normal. You think about it for this way, like we've had life, the Earth, according to every estimate, is like 4.54
Right.
billion years old, something like that. We've had life on Earth from around the first billion years onward, but very, very, very simple life, like very ultra simple life. We've only had complex life from what's called the Cambrian explosion from around 500 million years. So about roughly 500 million years. So that would be about 1/10 of Earth's existence. The last 10% of Earth's existence, we've had complex life. And of that, we've only, human beings, people can argue, oh, there's been very advanced civilizations that have been completely lost millions of years ago. I don't happen to believe that. Someone might, but what I see is human beings, this civilization that we have happened, if you look at the last, all this long eons of time, the human experience is this last, the width of a human hair, basically. Like we just got here. We just got here in the long history. You really think about this. Hundreds of thousands of years. You're reading that book, Egypt Before the Pharaohs. You said it goes back hundreds of thousands of years. So even just take the last 500 million years in groups of 100,000s. How many hundreds of thousands of years do you have to go where it's just life, just natural animal life, animals eating other animals, on endlessly. And then all of a sudden, here we come and we just build this creation of ours. It doesn't seem normal, it seems. And so I've asked myself this question all the time, like, what is it that allowed us to do this? And I am convinced that we were able to achieve a level of cognition because, first of all, we selected for it evolutionarily. We selected for intelligence because our ancestors were able to utilize their hands. They had to adapt for a variety of reasons. We don't need to go into all of that. And intelligence became their great evolutionary trait. Unlike that for other animals have intelligence too. And other animals also have selected for intelligence. But we primates got a little lucky in a lot of ways. And it kind of took hold with us. And we developed this feedback loop of intelligence and ability to manipulate the environment, which was our real key. We discovered some ancestor of ours, they took a stick, they took a rock, and they realized, oh, wow, I can actually use other parts of this world for my benefit. It doesn't have to be just one thing. It could be a lot of things. What else can I use? And I'm going to start developing curiosity and looking around. So in other words, we started developing abstract thought. There are other highly intelligent animals. I don't think this is what they do, but we do. And then that eventually led us into symbolic thought, that is language. And language really, I think, is one of the real keys. Like with language, I can go from me thinking something to being able to share it with you, and we can share it with other people. And suddenly now you have the power of numbers. And so that has nothing to do with us as human beings. That has everything to do with the fact that our species discovered this secret. It's like a secret of the universe. We discovered a kind of logic, that there is a logic to this universe. There's an order. There's an order to this universe. And we through development of our intellect, we're able to attune ourselves with that and became able to utilize it and eventually use it to master much of the world. And so I think that's a weird thing. Now the problem with that is that I think it's inherently unstable. Because really what we've done is, by manipulating the world to suit our needs, which is great for us, it's awesome. I mean, it's incredible for us, but of course it means that we have to push around every other life form on the planet, and we make them work for us. So we've reorganized the entire natural order of this world, from which we ourselves evolved and live in and still rely on. And we're messing with that. And that's a complex system as well. And you have to wonder, the war is one dangerous thing that we do. It's very dangerous. But even messing with the ecosystems, another dangerous thing. But let me mention the war. That's really central to us. You have a lot of people, myself often wondering, like, why do we have to fight all the time? Why are we so violent? But we have to remind ourselves that it's actually literally violence that has allowed us to develop at all. It's a big part of our intellect. We don't want to admit this, but I mean, hell, the human shoulder probably evolved for the need to throw rocks at animals. I mean,
well, that's true. I mean, as soon as we got a handle on fire, we burned our neighbor's house down, on purpose.
We're territorial.
Right.
We're very territorial. All creatures are territorial, not just us, but we're territorial with the ability, with a lot of capabilities to enforce and defend that territory. That's what makes us a little bit different. We're no more territorial than your average neighborhood bird, but we're just way more capable than a bird.
Those hummingbirds outside of my house are pretty friggin' territorial. Yeah, they are gangsta, by the way, way gangsta. But how does the ET component fit into us being so unique? And I might even suggest, as I ask that question, isn't it the same everywhere in the universe? I mean, hydrogen is hydrogen.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I think so. I ask these questions a lot. Another series of pieces I put on my website over at Original Members is, I say the thing: are ETs totalitarian? Are ETs territorial? I mean, are we becoming like them with the development of this society that we're creating? I ask these questions a lot because, like you, I think they're very relevant. And here's one thing I definitely believe: assuming whoever is here is from another planet. So that's an assumption. So you can make different assumptions. Where are they from? Are they from another world? Are they from another dimension? Can you define dimension, please? Like that, when people say that, I often feel we don't really have a handle on what that even means. I'm not saying there's no such thing as a potential dimensional entity, by the way, but is that exclusive of extraterrestrial? I don't think so. I think you could be from another planet, but have an ability to manipulate space and time in a way that seems interdimensional, perhaps. But if they're from another planet, if we just go there, so then we can make a few assumptions. We can assume that they are or were biological in some way. They could be post-biological. They could be very strongly engineered in AI in different ways, but they would be rooted in biology, even so. And also we can assume probably that they, like us, became the apex predators of their world. I think we can assume that, and predator is a big part of that, because I don't think you could dominate your planet without being a predator. I just find it very difficult.
You couldn't dominate it if you were getting pushed around by something else. Progress is a little difficult.
I mean, yes, right? Our ancestors initially weren't predators. Actually, they were fruit-eating, plant-eating prey who became meat-eating predators.
Yeah, they were runners. They were runners.
They were runners, absolutely.
Absolutely.
But that's right. So here's what I guess I think is, so any extraterrestrials that would dominate their planet probably were predators. They probably went through a similar process to what we have just been going through, adapting and learning and developing curiosity and aggression to rule their planet. Now, does that mean that they're aggressive now? Well, it sure might. I mean, it absolutely might. Now, if they're not aggressive, then I would submit it's because they don't have to be, because somehow or another they're used to getting their own way. Because they're so powerful that they don't need to be overtly violent to get what they want, because they know how to get what they want. I mean, that's what every living creature wants to get what it wants. You know, you want food, you want to be able to reproduce, you want to have shelter. And then when you develop a mind like we have, you have thoughts and ideas and you want to express those. It's that simple. So they're used to getting what they want, just like we are becoming used to getting what we want. And so I do think on that basis, I'm willing to assume that, yeah, there's a certain, for any differences that there may be in between us and aliens in terms of psychology, I am definitely willing to think that we've got this much in common, that there's a potential territoriality involved with them, and a willingness to use force if necessary, or use coercion if necessary, to get their way, to get what they want.
Now, what about DNA? Right? Would their body, forget about carbon base or, some other, and you look at the periodic chart or table and they've picked out a couple of, okay, let's just say it's carbon, and there's reasons why carbon works. Okay.
Yeah, carbon works great.
It's an adaptable thing. It likes to glue on to stuff, right? So,
right.
But
it's a better solution than silicon, which a lot of people will mention silicon. But carbon
people mention it, right? Yeah. Silicon's difficult. Okay, so, but would there, you know what I mean? Would it be RNA influencing and taking the instruction set over to DNA, just like us? Built with the same fundamental, amino acids and basic sugars, right?
You wanted to ask this of a microbiologist or an evolutionary biologist. This is not really my wheelhouse, but I would assume, I would be willing to think probably it'd be a lot of commonalities.
Right. I mean, why would we expect something different? Right? Chemistry is chemistry.
Is made up of the periodic table. Exists here and it exists on the other end of the galaxy, and it exists everywhere that we can understand. It exists. So the same elements, they're the same building blocks of the universe, of the physical universe. That's right. So I would assume also, and knowing hydrogen is the most common abundant element, we know this, and walk through all of that. I think what you're saying is very, very reasonable, that we can expect other life forms to have certain things in common. And moreover, you talk about bipedal creatures with two arms. Is that actually, could that be expected? And I would think, yes, I think that would be expected. I think if it's actually, this has nothing to do with human beings. It's not like they're looking like us. No, it's like we and they look like the basic successful body plan that you would need for a land-based dominant life form to dominate his world. And it just took, in our case, it took 500 million years of complex life to produce that.
It's hard to build things without opposable thumbs, right?
Yeah,
and not using all four of your things to walk around. If you're using two to be mobile, then you've got two others that are able to do stuff with. It just makes sense. It just makes common sense.
Because every extra limb you get comes at a cost. The cost is energy. The cost is how much food do you need to take in and all that. So you need an efficient body plan that's able to do things, right? And everything's a trade-off. If you want a big brain, well, a lot of nutrition's got to go to that brain. And then other things have to probably get less attention, less energy. And that's just the way it goes. So this particular body plan seems to me is we can see the proof is actually in the history. Like, this body plan is what has allowed a species to be able to manipulate the planet and to manipulate the world to its own ends to a degree unimaginable.
Well, when you look at something like, okay, I'm going to pull up something basic. Sea otters. Cute, adorable, horny as hell. They hold hands when they sleep, right? But you know what else they do? They go down.
I think the holding hands is for safety as much as anything else.
But it's pretty cool to see. But anyway, they collect oysters and clams, come up with rocks in their hands, and break the seashells on their bellies while they float, and then eat. Now, wait a minute here. Hold on a minute. Now, is that a tool?
Yes.
Right? Right?
Yes, that is.
So it's
They're
65.
doing what we do. They're doing the same thing.
Same thing. So in 65 million years, are they building the internet?
They could.
Right.
Sure they could. They would have to. Absolutely, they could. Given the right conditions. Yeah, no question. And I think any life form, given the right opportunities over a long enough period of time would evolve to do that. But you have to have the right circumstances, the right challenges, and all of that. But yeah, with sea otters doing what they do, and other primates, chimpanzees, we know also will use tools.
Get termites out of holes or twigs.
Yeah. So we're not unique in that way. We've gone farther with it. We've turned it into a conceptual thing. Like with us, it's a little bit more. It's much more formalized with our way of thinking.
The asteroid that hit the Earth 65 million years ago, if that doesn't happen, you and I are not here doing this show. That's the first thing. All right. That's one of the things that came out of that. But let's say the asteroid doesn't hit. Do dinosaurs build radio telescopes?
Quite possibly. Why not?
Yeah.
You had there's a one dinosaur known as the Troodon. I think it's Troodontids or whatever they're called. It's a group of them. They appear to have been quite intelligent. We now know for the last few decades that yes, birds are essentially the last living dinosaurs. We know this. There's no controversy about that. When I was a kid, that was not known, but it's known now. And birds, we know some birds are highly intelligent. Highly intelligent. Look at a crow. Crow has the intelligence of, I think, of a 5 or 6 year old child, something like that. They actually have advanced reasoning capabilities in many ways. And there are other birds. Parrots are highly intelligent. So, yeah, I don't think there's any reason not why dinosaurs could not have evolved to a high level of intelligence given the right time and opportunity. And with some of those, like with the Troodons, they were bipedal. They had arms, you could say. I think they had claws, not fingers and nails, but, they could make it work. They certainly would have been able, given time and opportunity, perhaps to develop those arms and hands and to utilize that intelligence for their own benefit. I would say it's totally possible.
Now, so back to the ET part of this. We are observing exoplanets. We now have the ability, and the craziest part of our evolution and where we are today, to look and study the atmosphere and the components of planets that are, dozens, hundreds, millions of light years away is insane. That's just crazy talk, but we do
totally
it.
Agree. It's
amazing. It's amazing. But we are also looking at the state of said planet at that time. Right? Okay, so we are observing it at that state of time. So let's say entropy takes over. We do whatever, and we turn this into a lump of coal. Right? We have the capability. An asteroid hits the planet, whatever it is, right? But if somebody observing us after that time period would not see that we were ever here, and they may say, well, it's full of methane, or it's full of carbon monoxide. It has acid in the air, right? Or whatever it is. There's no life. We could be doing the same thing because we are looking at the status of a planet not in real time.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Like, is it the norm that every advanced civilization, or that most of them, will destroy themselves? I think the answer, it could very well be the norm that they do destroy themselves, but some don't. I believe some don't, because we have a phenomenon here. Someone has found us. Someone is blanketing our world with their technology and with the things that they're doing. So someone has figured out how to go interstellar or interplanetary. So it's, becoming a highly technologically advanced civilization is not an automatic death sentence. But I would suggest that it's almost a death sentence, because I really look at the absolutely rapid transformation that human civilization has undergone. And again, it's something that we don't often think, that it's a rapid transformation, because we only live, 75, 80 years, whatever. That seems like a long time to us. 5,000 years seems like a long time to us. And so we don't really grasp just how unbelievably, like, snap of a cosmic finger we are. Like and that's a big problem, because it's really misunderstanding our species fundamentally. We're a blip. We're a blip that's almost like a vertical line. And so the question is, can you maintain that blip for any extended period? Can you maintain it for 100 years? To us, 100 years is a long time. Well, it isn't. Can you maintain it for even 1,000 years? That seems like a long time, but that's not really a long time either.
Well, when you think about, the dinosaurs, 100, 150 million years.
Yeah.
And became fully evolved until the asteroid. But when you look at the other stuff underneath that, what is the extent of the existence of that? And I would say that most robust civilizations, 1,000 years. 1,000 years at best, right?
Well, so far that's the case with us. We haven't shown that we've got that longevity. So there's got to be a way to kind of codify and solidify that success you've made, and that's what we're, as a species, we're trying to figure this out. So do you do that? Well. The problem is, as I was saying earlier, like, we got to in large part to where we are through violence. I hate to say it, but we did. Violence has promoted so much innovation in our technology. What do you think caused the Bronze Age to begin with? The desire predominantly for better weapons. Well, better tools, yeah, but better weapons. And the need, or the perceived need, for territoriality, to protect yourself from those people over there. And we've been fighting since before we had civilization. You look at some of the earliest remains of Neanderthal and early human and pre-human, like Homo erectus, and there was violence. You see fossil skulls with holes in their head from something that went through, like a arrow point and things like that. Like, and also signs of cannibalism were quite common. Like, we were ultra violent. And so now, but that violence allowed us to succeed. But now here we are. We've got nuclear weapons. We've got bioweapons. We've got chemical weapons. We've got all kinds of computing weapons. And, like, we're dangerous. And we have about 200 formerly sovereign nations on this planet. dominated by a couple of big shots, namely the US and a few others, China, Russia, that like to throw their weight around. And how is that going to end? It's one thing when your most dangerous weapon is a sharp, pointy stick. It's another thing when your most dangerous weapon is a fleet of nuclear weapons that can literally destroy all life on the planet. And so it requires a different modality of existing. Now, how do you do that? I don't know if that I figured. Do you do it? Seriously, I'm going to ask this because I hate those guys that I'm talking about, the World Economic Forum and the Bilderberg and the totalitarian people who this is their plan. They want to create a single global governance. This is their openly stated goal. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is literally their openly stated plan.
Well, let me postulate something then. Let's stay right there. If we introduce ourselves to the people from another world, an exoplanet, are we going to look at them as a planet or individual territories on that planet?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. Really good question.
We have to maybe evolve into, I'm not talking about the New World Order, or am I? Right. Because if we're going to perceive another race of beings from a planet, are we looking at their subspecies, or are we looking at them as creatures from that planet? And how do they look back at us? Let's say they call this planet Earth because they've been monitoring us for a while. They know that we call it Earth, right? So are they calling us Earthlings, or are they calling us Russians and Americans?
Yeah.
But I don't think so, right? So
there's a lot of interesting questions there, and yeah. I mean, it comes down to would an alien species develop different cultures? I mean, culture is really the foundation of a nation. What is a culture? A culture is simply organized patterns of behavior and traditions and learning, right? So that's a culture, and we have all these different cultures on our planet. We have different cultures because the people of all the various cultures lived in different kinds of environments that facilitate different types of cultures to develop. It's that simple. And so there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. That's normal. It's a perfectly natural thing. But the problem is, what do you do when cultures develop in competition to each other with weaponry, and with sophisticated, dangerous weaponry? Now, how do you figure it out? How do you work it out now? And I don't know what the answer to that is, other than world religions are one attempt to fix that. What is the ultimate Christian dictate? It's love one another and even love those who hate you. Like that's an idea that you could imagine could allow a species to get along in this wacky thing that we have called human civilization, where we're all kind of dealing with each other in this competitive environment. But if that's not succeeding, because we've had that for a couple of thousand years, and it really hasn't fixed things fully, has it? We still have a lot of violence on this planet.
That never really soaked in, did it? That never really took hold.
No. So what are other methods? Well, there's always force. There's always imposing force over a species, and that's not a solution I would like. But when I look at alien species, or at least when I when I look at what it looks like they are, one thing that it looks like they may be is a kind of hive mind. You certainly get that. You think of any description of gray aliens. There's what you don't get among them, at least what I can see, is what is their culture actually? Do they have a sense of individuality? Do they have a sense of humor? Do they chit chat over coffee, do on vacation? You don't get any sense of that. Now, it could be that abductees or people who've had encounters don't see that part of their culture, I suppose. But maybe it's just that they're different, that somewhat robotic-like, that their individuality has been kind of siphoned out to some extent, maybe to a large extent. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, there are other people who've had contact experiences with other beings, particularly human-looking beings. That's a big part of this, where that's not necessarily the sense that you get. So there's a lot still that we need to figure out here. But I guess my overall point when thinking of how can we survive long enough as a civilization, we haven't figured this out. So we have to, I mean, I'm a believer in the value of freedom. I talked about core values earlier. Freedom is one of those. But also, I believe in order and safety. Like you can't just have all one and all the other. So we're always riding a line between freedom and order. And we need that. You don't want a society in which it's just like everyone does whatever they want all the time. That's not a good solution. But you also don't want a society in which there's so much suffocating order that there's no wiggle room for freedom. So we're trying to figure out a middle ground there. And I hope that we can continue to do that while still maintaining order and safety in a world in which, frankly, the weapons that we create are ever more dangerous. That's a big challenge we're going to have in the next however many centuries we have. And if we don't succeed, then I think, as Einstein said, the next world war will be fought with sticks and stones. So
that's true. That and going back to the asteroid, or let's say we're being observed from Andromeda. Andromeda's not that far away. Let's say we're being observed from 5,000 light years away, right? 10,000 light years away. You have Neanderthal here. You've got Cro-Magnon. You've probably got campfires burning. You may have shelters. You certainly have methane. You've got things farting, right? Mm-hmm. So there's life on the Earth. I'm not saying that to be cavalier. I'm being very serious. Yeah. And so you would observe and go, well, wait a minute. They have all of these components. This is certainly interesting. They're not looking at us with the internet, with Teslas, right? They're not seeing that version of us. They're seeing that. That's interesting.
That's right.
Why wouldn't you jump in your wormhole transportation vehicle and zip over here and check things out?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, you would. I don't think there's any question.
And if you did, now this is the dovetail into USOs. Say you and I did that, and you and I went to a water-based planet. Are we going to go where the cities are, right, and get discovered and maybe have a really bad time, right? A really bad time, right. Or do we go where nobody is, right? And check out the oceans and check out stuff. In that capacity, because it's safe.
I think you would do both, which is what we have seen. But yeah, you would definitely go to places where you would be more secure. I don't think there's any question about that. But you would also, I think you would be checking them out. You'd be curious about them, particularly once they become really, really active. Like if it's 10,000 years ago, you could have a real easy time of observing. I think it would be a lot easier 10,000 years ago to kind of quietly observe these creatures without being noticed. Today it's a lot more difficult. We have all of these sensors and these mechanisms to detect them, but they obviously are still checking us out in our populated areas. But the oceans, as you mentioned, and this has been my study for the past 2 years, and I'm just about done with this project now, and it is a study of USOs. And no, I haven't given it a finalized title yet, by the way. It might be USOs, a history. I'm still actually working that out. That comes last. But it is a history, best history I can do of the phenomenon of unidentified submersible objects, that is water-based UAP, UFOs, USOs. And it's been an amazing, mind-blowing journey for me. like most other researchers, I mean, I've been interested in USOs. Of course, how could you not be? It's just inherently fascinating. But on my website, a couple of years ago, I answered a question that someone had about a sighting near Adak Island, and that's a small island in the Aleutian Island chain, going from Alaska to basically Russia. It's a very, very long island chain there. And in the summer of 1945, toward the very end of World War II, there was a U.S. transport ship that was going right by Adak Island. So it's in the northern Pacific. And they had what seems to be a USO encounter. A craft that appeared, this wasn't a definite USO, but it appeared to have come out of the water. It's the best view that they got of it. And they were out hundreds of miles of ocean all around them. So you got to wonder where this thing came from, probably from underneath the water. But then it circled the ship a couple of times. A bunch of crew members saw it, and then it just zipped off. It looked like a flying saucer, So someone asked about that, and I did a little piece on it, and that got me started. I thought, this is really interesting. What other water-based sightings of that time period can I find and look into? And I just started to go on a little mission to collect them, And for that summer, this is the summer of 2022, I did a number of video presentations for my site and a couple for YouTube, dealing with water-based UFO phenomena. And it was so engaging to me. I just kept going. So I found a number of databases that I worked off of. There was one by the late Carl Feint. Carl was a really superb researcher who focused on UFOs and water, including but not exclusive to USOs. Carl was interested in all interactions of these objects with water and how water affected them, how they affected water. So he got into a lot of the science of this subject, which is interesting. And I've got a little bit of that, but my main interest is in just collecting and describing the cases where these objects are either in bodies of water or going into or coming out of, or a few other cases where they're just very low over large bodies of water. But for various reasons, I chose to include them. And so Carl was one data set. He had a website that it's kind of still existing, but it kind of doesn't, because it's not active. You can't explore it, but it was called waterufo.net. He had a lot of sightings there. Then I data mined the entire National UFO Reporting Center, and I do mean all of it. That was a tough nut to crack, but there's a lot in there. There's a tremendous amount in there. Also, I was given access graciously by MUFON to their CMS. That's their, what is it called? The computer management system. Is that what they call it?
I think so.
All of their cases. And my God, MUFON has a lot of cases. And then, a lot of other sources, lots of books, and a lot of other web-based sources as well that I just plundered, essentially. So I have over 600 specific USO cases that I've incorporated into this. And I'm actually still even including a couple more. I'm not 100% done. Of some of the more recent ones, some of the leaked ones, I'm including all of those out in there as well, of course. But it goes right up to the very end of 2023. I mean, I've got about a dozen, 10 or a dozen cases from 2023. And before I publish, I will go back into the early data set of 2024. And if there's any I can include, I will. So it'll be very up to date. Going back about roughly 200 years, pretty seriously. I have one case from the year 1717 off the coast of Martinique in the Caribbean. But most of them it really starts going really in the early 19th century. And you start seeing more and more of these. And so I just put them all in, and I'm trying to breathe life into this forgotten phenomenon. I don't mean to cut you off. I'll just say 99% of these cases, I will assure you that even experienced UFO researchers probably are not aware of these. So this is going to be really new to everyone.
Well, we have I've made an executive decision. I'm not going to do a commercial break, but I will say to everybody, help support the show. I've got links below for all of our sponsors and things that are going on. And so please
I don't
click
want to
on
stop
those
you from
links.
making your money. You want to run some
Man,
commercials? Come on.
dude, I am too into this right now. So, and back to your point, though. You can't help what pop culture and where the interest is, right? Everybody wants an alien invasion of New York City, right? That's always going to get the attention. And so the water-based part of this it doesn't have the luster, right, that the other cases do. And I can appreciate that. But
I think it does.
Have you found areas of concentration where there were more sightings than others?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different types of patterns in fact, the big part of my book, I'm going through this now, is I'm creating categories of all different types. Because I realize I've got over 600 cases. What I don't want to do is just throw them all out there without any order. So I'm creating categories, appendices. I've got maps. All of that's going to be in there. And by the way, it's being very liberally illustrated. I've got a really good illustrator. I love him. He is into it. He's creating a lot of them. So all of that's really good. But yeah, hotspots. So there's a few. There's actually at least 5 off the top of my head, 6 or 7 that I can think of. Probably the most obvious one to me when I look at it is the Caribbean, and specifically Puerto Rico. I would list probably as the most noteworthy hotspot where I'm seeing the most concentration of really amazing reports.
Now, do they involve the military, or is it commercial or private?
A lot of both. Because on the east coast of the eastern end of that island is Roosevelt Roads military. It's a military base that the U.S. has been running for a long time, and it's a very heavily U.S. Dominated area there. And there are indeed many USOs in the Roosevelt Roads area there on the eastern.
And we have the Area 51 for the U.S. Navy is there.
Yeah. That's right. That Vieques Island, that's one of their areas. It's this tiny little thing off the eastern coast of Puerto Rico. There's just a heavy U.S. military presence there in general. So, but actually, I would say the western coast of Puerto Rico, we talk about places like Aguadilla, where there was the famous video on the northwest coast there, for example. That's on the west side. I think there might be a little bit more on that side, but it's pretty evenly distributed. So that's one area. Another, certainly we'd be off the coast of California, looking at the Channel Islands, and specifically Catalina Island. Definitely a hot spot. There's no question about that. Lots and lots of USO activity there. And actually, you can go all the way up and down the California coast, and going down to the lower California coast off Mexico. All of that is really quite active, I would have to say. But one area that I think people, at least I myself, did not expect necessarily to be a hotspot would be the northeastern Atlantic coast. So the U.S. and Canadian coast, up going from, even Maryland, but all the way up past Philly, New York, Boston, and well into New England and Canadian territory, New Brunswick, and out into the Atlantic. My God, that area is lots and lots of USOs. So those three, that's all Western Hemisphere, close to the United States. Not surprising. You get a lot of reports, I think in some part because it is U.S. dominated, and Americans are just way more likely to be trying to report UFOs and USOs in general. We've just got a better reporting infrastructure. We've got MUFON. We've got the National UFO Reporting Center. The fact is they're both easy for Americans to utilize. They're also easy for other English speakers to utilize, but they're dominated by the United States. There's no question.
And those are also shipping lanes.
Yeah.
right? Yeah, they're
Yeah, you
shipping
gotta look.
lane.
That's right. Very good. We have to look at that. So another big area that's not English speaking or U.S. dominated would be off the coast of like Japan and Russia. So like the Sea of Japan, and north of that, a sea called Sea of Okhotsk, which is off the coast of Kamchatka. Very inhospitable area. I mean, it's cold as hell and the weather's terrible, but they've got a bunch of USOs up there. And then all through the South China Sea, yes, all through the shipping lane where you're going through the Strait of Malacca, which is where so much heavy international shipping takes place. Anything China ships to Europe or to that doesn't go over the Pacific goes through the Strait of Malacca. And there's always been a lot of weird activity in that area. Going, further west to the Arabian Sea between India and the Middle East, that general area has got a number of cases. The Persian Gulf has a weird history. This goes back to the cases listed by the pioneer Charles Fort. A lot of people remember Charles Fort. He was the guy who really was the first person really to investigate what we would call UFOs. He spent years in the New York Public Library just looking through old newspaper accounts. Fort did this back during like World War I, and he's finding all of these old cases. And in the Persian Gulf, a lot of shipping from the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, people, captains of ships would report this weird kind of pinwheel light effect under the water. These large, like hundreds of yards in length, these spinning, bright, glowing, I guess you can call them pinwheels, and it's bizarre. That phenomenon has been noted there and elsewhere in the East, Malacca, Strait of Malacca, South China Sea, for quite a long time. And, well into the 20th century and the later part of the 20th century. So I don't think it's fully gone away. So I don't know what that is, but the Persian Gulf has had a lot of those. Another hotspot definitely, though, would be off the coast of South America, particularly the Atlantic side. I'm thinking about Argentina, but also Brazil and Argentina, big time. On the other side of South America, off the Chilean coast, to a lesser extent, I've seen a number of cases. A lot of it, I don't know if they're not hotspots. It's just that I don't know if they get reported as much. Because one thing I notice is that, look, first of all, who's out in the middle of the Indian Ocean? Like, not many people. So if you're not there, you're not going to see it and you're not going to report it. So we're mostly landlubbers. But when you get a lot of civilian sightings, it's almost always at the shore, at the coast, looking out at a large body of water, usually the ocean, sometimes a big lake. So a lot of these sightings, they're clustered close to the shores of a country. And does that mean that there's more USOs there, or does it just mean that's where we're seeing them? And I tend to think maybe a little bit of both, but I tend to think that's just where we're seeing them. Perfect case in point. I have a lot of cases of these off the coast of Italy, but not nearly as many off the coast of Greece or off the coast of Turkey or off the coast of any other nation that's in the Mediterranean. Just Italy dominates. Why is that? Well, I think it's because it just so happened that there was an Italian UFO research group that has over time been very active in collecting these reports. So that's good for them. It's good for us. But it could, if you're only looking at it in terms of the number of reports, you could get a skewed version of understanding of what's actually going on. So that's always something to keep in mind. We're seeing what we are able to see. And that's kind of a shocking thing to me, because it makes me think as many as there are, I think they're very likely there's just vastly much more. Much more.
I was just in Peru, and in Paracas, you take this. It's a tour boat thing. It's a protected area of islands with amazing birds. And dude, I saw penguins Like penguin.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
good. Penguin. Have you ever seen a penguin in the wild? No, you
No.
have not. Right? Dude, it was pretty cool. Anyway, so going out to these islands, you can look it up. You can look up Paracas, the Trident, or the Candelabra. Okay. And you can look at, I've got lots of pictures and video of it. It's on the side. It's large. It's like a three. It looks like three candles on a candelabra, but it's ancient, and it's about, I don't know, 1,000 feet high, and it's on the side of 500 feet. It's huge. You could see this thing from space, right? It's like ginormous, but it's right there on the shoreline. And so when you're driving by, now it's amazing to look at. But then I suddenly thought to myself, that's not a navigational tool. It's too old for that. This was not a shipping lane. It's an indication of something. Wait a minute. That thing is for the sky. That's to look right because it's flat. It's a little sliding.
You're talking about the plains of Nazca here, right?
No. Nazca is a whole different thing. This is called this is the Paracas. Here, I'll pull it up. I have it in my let's see, Paracas Trident.
Is it similar or just smaller than the drawings of the Nazca line?
Okay, I'm just going to pull this up really quick, and it's really this simple. Now check this out. This is so ginormous, but it's right on the shoreline. Here it is. Okay, there it is. And it's huge.
Yes.
Yeah, it's huge. So from here to here, it's got to be, I don't know, man, 1,000 feet. And it's kind of weird too,
like 3 or 4 football fields long.
It's dude. Right? I'm telling you, you can see this from space. And so now it's not, all I'm saying is there is something it has to do with the water and saying hello. And if I was to me, that's what I see. It's a signpost up ahead, right? It's like that, and it makes you wonder with all of the things that are going on in and around Peru and those areas going back to the Nazca lines. And I would definitely consider a relationship here between Nazca and this, not close geographically, but there is a similarity here where it seems like this is pointing to the sky. Has there what about underwater UFO bases? And I wanted to bring up Bill Cooper too as well, and I want to swing back to that.
Cooper had a USO sighting that I have included.
A big one. Yeah.
USS Tiru was a submarine, 1966. Well, as far as the bases go, I mean, there's been many suspicions that I have come across in my research of the existence of undersea bases, and I definitely tend to believe that there are a number of undersea bases. But I can't tell you that I've confirmed, oh, yes, there's a definite undersea USO base here or there or in this other place. I can tell you that there's strong suspicion of bases that have come up again and again in certain areas. One is near Catalina Island, without a question. That's come up a lot. And I tend to think, yes, that sounds right to me. Definitely near Puerto Rico. I'm inclined to think about the Puerto Rico Trench, which is just north of that island. Quite a bit of activity that's taken place. This is the deepest trench in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's extremely deep. It goes down to, I think, almost 30,000 feet. Super, super deep. And there's been some very bizarre activity seen there. It's just like less than 100 miles north of the island of Puerto Rico. Claims of a base in the Black Sea. which is quite interesting since that's, right where there's a big war going on these days. Is there a USO base in the Black Sea? Well, there have definitely been a number of claims over the years that is so. I strongly think there's a base off the coast of Argentina, in the Atlantic as well, just based on some activity there, and also claims of other researchers who over different periods of time have studied it, and this is what their conclusion is as well. So, I mean, those are a couple of places. I have a feeling there's quite a few of them.
I want to mention this to you really quick. I'm going to pull this up. This came in before the show tonight. I'm going to pop this up. This is from Bishop. He says, the USS Underwood, 1993, green meteor went under the ship and then back up into the sky. The CO, the commanding officer, came on the 1MC and said, we shouldn't talk about what we just witnessed.
All right, so I just took a screenshot of that because I want that case. I don't have that in here. And whoever was kind enough to put that up, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, that is totally classically typical of many of the U.S. Navy encounters that I have seen. In fact, in the time we have left, I hope we can get into it. But the other thing is, if that individual has information that has not been published anywhere on it and they would like to let me know, I would be grateful.
Yeah, Bishop, you can reach out to me. I will happily forward any. I'll take care of it. Yeah,
I would love to get. So the thing, let's just talk a little bit about this, because let's talk about a different pattern. One pattern of these USOs is that they have the ability to shut down an entire warship. They can just shut it down. It sounds shocking, but I'm telling you they can do it. There have been too many of these accounts, and not only American. I've got a number of Soviet Russian encounters as well, in which these objects come out of the sea, sometimes descend low directly over a ship when it's in the middle of the water. Both have happened, in which communications turn to gibberish for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, in which weapon systems cannot be engaged for as long as the ship or craft are there. And in a few cases in which the ships went actually dead in the water, engines stopped. We're talking aircraft carriers as well as all other kinds of ships. And we're talking Soviet aircraft carriers. We're talking U.S. aircraft carriers. I've got one from 1954 going way back, the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, an incredible aircraft carrier. It was very active. It was the first nuclear armed aircraft carrier in U.S. Navy, in World Navy history. In 1954, it's just 2 years after the FDR had another UFO encounter in the North Sea during a major NATO exercise called Operation Mainbrace. That was interesting. But here now, FDR is on its way from Europe, going all the way around the tip of South America up to go to Puget Sound for refitting. Somewhere along that long path, that ship encountered a huge, enormous cigar-shaped object that came down low over it. It was joined by two objects that came out of the water to join it. During the entire time, the ship attempted to launch or utilize weapons. The weapons would not function. There was a very detailed statement of this from a former officer of that ship, not just an enlisted man, but an officer of the USS FDR. In 1971, the USS John F. Kennedy, another aircraft carrier, was just north of the Caribbean, I think near the Bahamas. Or actually, I think, no, I originally thought, I think it was north of Puerto Rico, closer there. Same general area, where it encountered a large kind of orange sphere. And you get these reports a lot, these orange spheres. What the heck? What are they? Anyway, this thing is low over the ship. All communications from the USS JFK were just complete gibberish for about 25 minutes, according to the officer, not an officer, the man in charge of ship communication. and he wrote a detailed account of this. And the thing is, a lot of these encounters, they come from Navy guys who retired, and we're talking 10, 20, usually more than 20 years after they've left the service. They finally feel that, like, okay, I'm going to tell this story because it has to be told. And this inevitably is what happens. I got a bunch of stories from the 1990s, which that gentleman wrote one from 1993. I've a couple of other cases from U.S. Navy from 1993, I believe, and the early 90s. And in just about every case too, the commanding officer, or many times, will get on the ship's comm, the radio, and just tell the crew, what you experienced here was of a sensitive or classified nature, and you are not to speak about it. That has happened. And there have been many, many other times where sailors were just explicitly told, you are not going to talk about this. And there are other times where a sailor would see, or a group of sailors would see something really extraordinary and get no response from their commanding officers. And they were often baffled. They're like, how do you not respond to this? This is insane. These blue luminous objects are going directly under our ship, and they're screwing with our compasses, things like that. And many times, like, there would just be no response, and the guys would be mystified. But I think, what we're probably looking at is that the captains of the ship, they know full well what they're dealing with, and they also know there's just nothing we can do about it. We are not going to stir the pot here. I'll report it to my commanding officer and just deal with it in that way.
Now, specifically submarines, and I mentioned Bill Cooper earlier, who has spoken about this and wrote about it in Pale Horse, of course.
That's right.
1966, he's in the Navy. He's on a submarine. They were on their way
out in the Pacific.
They ended up docking in Hawaii, and that's where he got the debrief. Okay, so what about his case specifically?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting case. And, there's a lot of things about the Bill Cooper story that I, just like his career in general and some of his claims, that I feel like people have got to take with a huge pinch of salt. But be that as it may, I've always felt his Navy story, I've always believed it, and I also think it actually fits in very, very smoothly with all of the other Navy stories that I've come across. I have no reason to doubt what Cooper claimed he saw. And what it was is that we're talking summer of 1966. He's aboard the USS Tiru, Tiru. It's a submarine. It's surfaced. I'm trying to remember why. I haven't looked at this case in a couple of weeks, but he surfaced, and he's looking. He's got binoculars, and he sees through the binoculars in the distance a craft coming out and going back into the water repeatedly. It's doing some kind of display. He notifies there's another guy out there with him. I think they're seeing it together. Then they notify some other senior officers who come up. So at one point, there's like 4 or 5 of them above. So the sub is surfaced, and so they're looking out, and they're all seeing this. And Cooper said this thing was gigantic.
Yeah, it wasn't small. This was huge.
It was enormous. These things come in all sizes. This one was, the way he described it, just gargantuan. And the weirdest, there was one strange thing about that, which is the number of times it emerged and entered the water. It seemed quite a few times, more than the usual that gets reported. There are cases where an object will be seen emerging and then re-entering the water. That absolutely. And there's a few where it's emerging and entering and then emerging. But not so many where it's going repeatedly in and out of the water. But that does seem to be Cooper's story in this case. It's very interesting. He was, quite specific about a lot of his description there. And I believe it. I definitely elected to include it in my collection.
Now, what about the Trepang?
Yeah, I don't. That's an interesting one, and that John Greenwald has kind of discussed that one. I've got that on my docket, as it were, and I will very probably include it, even if I don't know that that was a genuine USO encounter. Let me beg off that one and just say that I'm looking at it, and I'll elect to see whether or not I want to include it.
Yeah. Alex Mistretta. Okay, so how this whole
I'm
thing?
not 100% convinced about it. I don't really know what I think about it.
Understood.
Yeah.
Alex Mistretta, a friend of mine, lives here in LA, great researcher, Bigfoot guy, crypto guy, very educated, very smart guy. Love Alex. And Alex. And he happened to get a copy of the magazine. It was a French magazine, 1970 or something like that. And where these photographs were in the magazine. That's how, if that hadn't have happened, the case never sees the light of day. And he just thought that they were pretty interesting. And let's put this out there. What does everybody think? And now I don't know. It's such a difficult case to research, but if it was, let's say, practice target balloons by the United States Navy. And I'm right down the middle on this one. I don't know which way to go, but it seems like there would be a lot of photographic evidence of that, right? I mean, it just seems like it should be in books and instruction manuals. You go to Great Lakes Naval Station for your training in Chicago. There is a whole section, a whole class, a whole semester of target shooting in the Navy at balloons, I would think, right? And stuff. That's the part with this case that the photographs are unbelievably crazy,
right? Yeah, they're spectacular photographs. I shied away from that one, but I really shouldn't. I have been wondering about it, and so let me revisit it, and I'll just decide what I think. Look, there's there's a number of borderline cases that I am electing to include anyway, just because they're cases that people are interested in or know about or want to know more about, and I'll include it. But that one, let me think about it. I included one case because it explicitly wasn't a USO case, but it was written about as one. It was actually written about in the very first good USO book ever by Ivan T. Sanderson, a book called Invisible Residents. It's a great book. I love that book. But the crazy thing is Sanderson starts that book off with a USO incident that really wasn't true. What he wrote about didn't take place. It was off of Admiralty Bay in Antarctica, and the spectacular case of this object breaking through big blocks of a sheet of ice coming out from under the ocean, and didn't happen. And no, I
read that, and the first half of the book. And I remember putting it down going, this is like the craziest thing I've ever heard. He's got eyewitnesses. He's got that, right? So I go back and man, the debunking on that part of it, and it just broke my heart because it was one of
the coolest, most spectacular USO cases you could ask for.
Right.
The problem was it wasn't. I mean, Sanderson. Look, you got to cut him some slack. He did great work. He really tried to be accurate, but he was writing this in the late 60s. It's hard to fact check every little thing. I mean, that's just the reality. But the main witness who was mentioned there read the account, and he's like, that is not what happened at all. And he was this isn't a case of someone under debunking orders. Like, you listen to this guy speak, and it's very, very obvious. He said, look, we did actually have potential UFO sightings while we were there. And he spoke quite openly about it. In fact, he said, but the case that Sanderson's writing about, he said, I don't even know where he got that from. Sanderson got it, I think, from an intermediate magazine, one of the many popular magazines back in the 1960s. Who the heck knows what the writer of that was thinking? I tried tracking that particular article down, and I've never been able to find it. It's very rare. So I'd love to be able to find the original version of the article Sanderson used. But anyway, you know, I can imagine there were a lot of very sensationalistic articles written for, you know, the reading public at that time. I mean, that's just how it was. And I think Sanderson just got snookered in by that one. Unfortunately.
Did you find out anything to add to the Puerto Rico Homeland Security video? Where, yes, it's a modern case. Yes, it's
the
recent.
Aguadilla case.
Yeah, the Aguadilla case, because
well, that one, you know, we're lucky because that was subject to a 164-page report by a group called the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. One of the members whom I know, Rich Hoffman, and he's great, excellent researcher, great guy down in Huntsville, Alabama, and he and his colleagues, these were MUFON people. They got interested in the case, and they just ended up doing a detailed analysis of the Aguadilla video. So anyway, I have their report. I used their report extensively in my own description of the case. And so there's a lot to say about that. I mean, the object itself was tracked clearly moving 80 to 100 miles per hour at various times. When it was in the water, and it was tracked on infrared cam, I mean, you can see it going into the water, the speed was virtually the same. It didn't slow down when it was in the water. It was moving still 80 plus miles per hour in the water. It's very interesting. It was, I think the size was something like 4 to 5 feet in diameter. Wasn't a huge object. It came in from the ocean, circled around the airport. I think the Rafael Hernandez Airport, circled around and then flew along the coast. It's seen as a famous video. Lots of people have seen it. If you haven't seen it, to any listeners, go watch it, look it up. It's easy to find. It's seen go into the water and it comes out and you see it separating into two. It becomes two objects. It's very strange. And then I think the video just ends. The video runs out. I don't know what happened to it. It's not clear to me where it ended up going. But anyway, so the SCU did a very detailed analysis of it, and I did incorporate that analysis. So it's not a Chinese balloon. It's not Chinese lantern. It's nothing like that. It's obviously not a balloon. In fact, they had wind measurements and directions and wind patterns of that day. The thing was at certain points flying against the wind at high speed. A balloon's not going to do anything like that.
Somebody wrote me and said, dude, it's been debunked, man. It's a seagull. And I remember going back on, what are people seeing here? That goes in a perfectly, when it's going up the runway in front of the hangars, that is straight and level.
That's right.
Just straight.
What is interesting about that, well, I've looked at that video as well, in fact, recently. And so when it's you see the two versions of it, you could think that those are birds. Like they could look like it. There's a kind of optical effect, in my view, in my opinion, where I could at least understand if someone were to say those look like birds, because at that moment they kind of did. But you have to take the whole thing in its entirety. So as that thing is moving, it's coming in, it's circling around, it's going over the water. I agree with you completely. It's too rock steady and it's too fast. It's too fast. The speeds have been calculated. You keep in mind, there's all this metadata around the video that gives all kinds of information for analysis. So the speed can absolutely be calculated from that. And you don't get seagulls flying at close to 100 miles per hour over the ocean.
No water disturbance either. That was the other thing that, at that speed, you're going to see something go, psh, and that does not happen. Point.
I mean, it's an infrared cam. I've wondered about that. And I'm trying to remember if they addressed that at all. But you're right. Like in the infrared video, you don't see water disturbance when that enters the water.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting.
It's definitely not seagulls. It's definitely not a balloon. If I'm not mistaken, over at Metabunk, I think they had the explanation of Chinese lantern at one point. It doesn't
look. I reserve the right to change my mind. Right,
Absolutely.
I do it all the time. All right, and I will if my eyes see headlights going through the trees and it's a car. And you think it's something else. You think it's, I will call it that. I have no problems with that. In the case with Aguadilla, that's a situation where even for me, where I back up and go, okay, that's unusual. That right there, I'm depending on my eyes.
Totally.
And what I'm seeing, I don't have an explanation for.
Yeah, and we're indebted to the researchers who really did a deep dive into that case and really analyzed that video very carefully. And they did more than just analyze the video. I think they did a lot of other background investigation on that as well. I can't remember every detail about that, but there was a lot of work that was put into that one. That's not just a cavalier case.
When we get into frequencies, terahertz, hertz, and pinpointing and triangulating, we also have information from satellites that is there too as well. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the United States Navy and other state actors, I'm not just saying the United States Navy, but have pinpointed the entrance and exit points repeatedly, maybe in the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean, and they know exactly what is going on?
I don't know for sure. I would my knowledge of this is very, very, very sparse. However, I would say yes, I would say it's likely that they must have some idea about where most of this activity is occurring. Got to think the answer to that is yes. I think it would be utterly negligent if they did not. But it's not clear to me that their coverage is absolutely comprehensive. I mean, we like to think that it is, but when you talk to some of these professionals, I've talked to different ones, over a period of time. It seems to me that they don't have a 100% 24/7 coverage the way people often will think. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for gaps in their intelligence collection, and also the fact that you've got different agencies that are in charge of monitoring with their satellites. And I mean, now we have U.S. Space Command, and in theory, things are shared, but I don't know how completely data is actually shared between Air Force and Navy and Army and different branches. So I suspect that there are still gaps, but I really can't say more because I don't know more than that. I mean, I get glimmerings here and there from different people.
And going back to like Cooper and the Tiru and the Trepang, and I would think that submarine crews would be one of the best sources of information because of what they have, but they're also the tightest lipped. That's a whole nother situation where submarine crews with not only the technology that they have, but they're in such close quarters and depend on each other. That's a different family affair than you have with a surface ship.
Boy, that's a really good point, because the number of submarine cases that I have been able to find is actually much, much smaller than from surface ships, for example. And in fact, I may have more submarine cases that come from the Soviet Union than from the U.S. And the Soviet cases are not all super specific, to be honest, but they're just, let's say, stories that come out dealing with Soviet submarines in very general terms, not necessarily a lot of specific cases. So yeah, it's true. Like you would think you would have a lot, and I have no doubt that they encounter a lot of these. There are a couple of submarine stories that are out there. There's a famous one from UFO researcher Mark D'Antonio, who's talked about his experience on a U.S. submarine. And in fact, I asked Mark if I could include his case in my book, and he agreed. It's interesting. He was, I mean, I don't know if everyone credits it. I mean, I think there might be some Navy people who say, I don't believe that. But he said that he was allowed to be on a U.S. submarine where they tracked some very, very fast-moving USOs. And he was able to get a little glimmer of that. And then was told in no uncertain terms, you did not see what you think you see, right? And he's like, right. But he did. And but there's not really a lot of stories coming out from submarines. It's true. I think they are tight.
Yeah. And thank you again, Richard. Great conversation tonight. The ocean, most people have not experienced open ocean time on a ship. Okay, that's just a fact of life. It's a numbers thing.
That's right.
I get that.
That's right. Yeah.
I have. You have, when you go out and you are in a position where you have got a full view, unobstructed of horizon and water, the totality of being alone really hits you. But here's the other part about that. Okay, it's a fun thing to experience. It's emotional. But you have to be looking at the right place at the right time to see anything.
That's right.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's that big.
And imagine this too. Imagine, because a lot of these, there's another pattern. A lot of these encounters happen at night and under cover of darkness. And I've spoken to several Navy, active duty and former Navy people who've had USO or UFO encounters. And I think it's terrifying. I mean, if you're a sailor, you're used to being out in the middle of the ocean, but like, you just stop and think, all right, that's a terrifying situation. You are very vulnerable. Ultimately, I'm sure, like, when you're out there doing your job, you don't think about that, but you're in the middle of the ocean with hundreds of miles of nothing but ocean all around you. And suddenly you encounter this unknown thing that's terrifying. And many of these encounters were terrifying to the witnesses who experienced them. And that includes hardened, Navy sailors who've seen a lot, done a lot, and they still some of them were terrified by what they saw.
Yeah, you shake them up and it's real. It's a real shakeup. What do you have a date?
I'm working on it. I mean, I was trying to get this done by May 1st. Probably not May 1st, but definitely this spring. Definitely have it done before my birthday, which is July 1st. I want it done well before then. I'm working hard on it. I'm excited about it. The writing is now getting to a point where it reads well. It's too large to be published as one book. It will have to be published, I think, as 2 volumes simultaneously, which is fine. There's nothing else I can do about it. It's just too much. And I'm excited about it. I mean, I'm more excited about this book than, I don't know, many others that I've done. I've really enjoyed this project. It's been very rewarding. I've been lucky to get support from a number of other researchers and just a few other people to talk to about this along the way. And I'm hoping by May, it won't be too long, a couple of months. So we're in the home stretch, and it's been a great project.
Thank you so much, Richard. Behave and be well. Give my best to Tracy. Absolutely. I've got some other things I need to talk to you about.
Yes, sir.
So we'll get that out of the way tomorrow. All right? Thank you so much, Richard. Behave and be well. Always the best conversation. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Richard Bleepin Dolan, right there. Steve Miller Band. RichardDolanMembers.com. RichardDolanMembers.com. The links are below over on our website and throughout social media. What a perfect night on the show. All right. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Dane Wigington is here. We're going to be talking about the global climate intervention, all of that and much more. Until then, I want you to be safe. Go back, Lee Tappy.